Okay, so this is part two of my lecture series on early modern theater. And as I was just saying at the end of the last one, I had been talking a little bit about medieval theater, so I just thought I would, yeah, give you a brief slide that sort of reviews some of that. Not that you really need to know, but I think it sort of helps get a sense of what theater was before the early modern period to understand what it became during the early modern period. So, as I was saying, lots of amateur acting and local props. They didn't really care about realism. You didn't have to create elaborate sets. And often it was biblical plays, but not just pious. There's a lot of good humor in these medieval plays. So they took Bible stories and made them funny and used them to instruct the populace about, yeah, religion. Not just religion, but that was a dominant theme for sure. This is an image, oops, of a pageant wig, and this is like a painting, like a pretty elaborate painting, but you can sort of see how like people are even sitting on the stage and they're pushing it around, so it was sort of part of a whole like town festival. Um, yeah, I don't think we really need to pause too much on this, but I wanted to show you a little image here. So then we get to the early modern period, and the first playhouse was built in 1567. It was called the Red Lion. This is a very bare bones depiction of London at the time. So here's the Thames River, Thames. If you've ever been to London, it's a magnificent body of water that cuts through the city and is very sort of winding. And this is the city wall. So you can see that, and you can still see remnants of the wall now if you go to London. Outside of the city wall is where theaters were built. And that is partly for taxation reasons. If they weren't within the city limits, they weren't taxed at the same level. And it also is because they were outside of the control of city officials, and for that reason, they became known as kind of dens of vices, that you would go there along with your bear baiting friends. I mean, there was a lot of animal, like they would take bets on, who was going to win in a brawl between two bears or two dogs or two chickens or whatever. I mean, you still have cockfighting today. There were brothels out there. And so it was sort of part of an entertainment regime, which meant that it was also associated with thieves, with immorality, with sin, and yet a lot of high class courtly officials also went to the theater, so it's not quite so cut and dried. There were two types of playhouses at the time: large outdoor public amphitheaters. If you've ever had been lucky enough to go to Shakespeare in the Park over the summer, at Central Park in New York. It's still free every summer. I guess not this summer because of COVID. Ah, tragic. But you can line up in the morning, and they're really dedicated, and they have some really fantastic actors. So that kind of theater is more like the public amphitheater, or they had more elite indoor private playhouses or halls where you had to pay a little bit more, just like today, to get a seat, and you would go and you would wear your fancy clothing and your jangles and your spurs on your boots and all. I mean, I don't know too much about early modern clothing or sumptuary conventions, but you would really get dressed up to go to the theater and really be seen. You weren't just watching the players on the stage, but you were watching each other, and you could really tell just by looking at someone's clothing what status, what social station they inhabited. I mean, that was sort of the sense, which we still do that today, don't we? Even if we live in like a really shitty apartment, it's like, well, I got to dress up and look good. And that's how I'll sort of get ahead in life. So the Globe Theater, the Lord Chamber or the King's Players named their theater the Globe Theater. It was initially constructed 1599, and his major plays between 1599 and 1608 were performed here. So take a minute and think about the term the Globe and what it makes you think of. Why would they choose? I mean, there are other theater names like Fortune, Red Bull, Boar's Head, Red Lion, Curtain, just simply theater. Not quite so descriptive. But Shakespeare's Men Playing Company opted to call their building the Globe. And this was, as I mentioned, the first time that actual playhouses were being built. So you have a stable identity associated with that playhouse. Um, you can write this down if you're thinking. I think that they wanted to be inclusive, right? Because it's sort of everyone in society, all different stations come together in the theater. And also, what you see performed on the stage is meant to represent all of the world, the whole globe. In fact, we're reading Othello, it's set in Italy. So the sense is you can go down the block to the globe. Oh, here it is on the map. It's on the other side of the Thames. That's still where it is now. Actually, they may have moved it slightly. No, I think. And you can get a taste of Italy in the comfort of your own city. So yeah, you would get a taste of other parts of the world in the Globe Theater. And so I think it's both a name that reflects a vision of society and also a little bit of a taste of what you get when you go there. And there are often meta references to the theater in plays that we read where they actually point or refer to the globe, and those are always really fun. So you don't really need to know this. Oh, in fact, I actually repeated some of this. That the playhouses were noisy and disruptive, considered dens of vice. They attracted thieves and undesirable people. Yeah, actually, this is just reiterating what I just said. And you can see, well, this is just a cool map from 1561 that I've linked to, where you can get a sense of where everything was. It's like a digitization of this very detailed London map. So if you go to mapoflondon.uvic.ca, and then you can sort of move around. Of course, this might be pushing my computer a little too far to try to do this right now, but yeah, you could click on where the bridges are and kind of explore and sort of get a sense of what the city was like at this time. Outdoor playhouses, what do they look like? So just as now they have a central yard that was open to the sky, so that the actual sky was sort of the heavens in the plays, although they did have a raised stage sticking out over the yard. They had a roof over the stage, which was also called the heavens. A tiring house, which that basically means like a place, like a dressing room or a dressing area behind the stage with a backstage area where actors dressed and waited to come on. Above this were lords' rooms, rooms for storage, and a room level with the heavens to work the special effects from. So it's quite elaborate at this time, that like what they could actually do with the physical stagecraft. There was galleried seating all around the yard on several levels, actually. So if you even look at this or imagine, you can get a sense of what it was like, okay, so everyone comes together to the theater. However, you can still see everyone's class status. So you can look into the rafters, and if you had a little more money, you can pay to get a nice seat to see the stage from over here. I think there's another, yeah, this is maybe a better modern reconstructed drawing. And this is kind of what it's like even now if you go to the Globe in London. But you could also pay, and I should have added a word, a note in this slide, apologies, but you can still pay like just a couple pence back then. I have no idea what the currency was like, but now I think it's £5. You can pay to be what's called a groundling, GROUNDLING. And so like literally you're just standing on the ground, which is actually the earth, or was back then, and have a drink, have a snack, and watch the stage unfold in front of you. So maybe you get sort of tired, but that's where, yeah, the people who couldn't necessarily afford the rafters would go. The history of the Globe itself. So after it was I guess the company started at the place called the theater, and then they actually dismantled the theater during the night due to sort of a taxation issue, and they snuck it down on Christmas when they knew no one was out. They actually snuck the actual physical scraps of the theater down the river and built the Globe sort of overnight, which is sort of interesting. But this is more what the private theaters would have looked like. They were lit by candlelight. And there's a new, I think it's called the Sam Wanamaker Theater in London now, right next to the Globe, that also tries to reconstruct what those old theaters would have been. This one is actually in, if you ever go to Stanton, Virginia, make sure to check out, I've never been to this place, but it's also a modern reconstruction of an early modern private theater. So you can get a sense of how much more intimate the productions in this space would have been. It accommodates a much smaller audience, much less than 1,000 people rather than thousands like the outdoor playhouses. And there are actually seats right on the stage. So I was just talking about the gallants in their dangles and spurs who would go and show off how rich they were just through their clothing at the theater. And that especially happened at the indoor playhouses where you could pay a little extra to be physically, literally on the stage. So you were kind of on display and part of the performance along with the actors. So let's move to Othello. We've talked about in class, in fact, I may have shown this slide to you, that he's called a Moor, that it's roughly refers to the region of Mauritania. This is a modern map, so this is not what it would have looked like back then. But they were historically a pretty powerful empire. They revolted against the Romans in 24 AD. But it's a slippery term. As we've seen, Desdemona calls Othello the Moor, so it's not always derogatory. It's definitely not like the N word now, but it still is used in this. I mean, they say he has a sooty bosom. They call him the devil. There's still a lot of racist language, so it's still a way of, I would say, dehumanizing him, especially when Iago refers to him. Like you're collapsing a person with a place in an area and eliding their name. So, but it is a little bit slippery. It can also sometimes just refer to Muslims. So we've talked a bit about the religious implications of this, that he's actually, then that could relate to the devil thing, like he's evil because he's not of the Christian religion. And there is a tradition of Blackface and Othello. So I realize I only have 3 minutes left. But you can see some depictions. I mean, blackface now means something very different. There were some black people in England, but not too many. They were considered sort of foreign and exotic. I think there's an article here that I have open over here. So if you're interested in reading more about blackface in America, why it's so harmful. I mean, any kind of stereotype, as Chinua Achebe says, the whole idea of a stereotype is to simplify and to turn Black people into caricatures or minstrels or people who are only here for our entertainment. You can see there's a little bit of like animalistic qualities to some of these depictions. So blackface is no joke, and it's even as late as like the 80s when Anthony Hopkins played Othello in brownface. We don't do it anymore. We definitely don't. It's not okay these days. Also, I just have some more information in the side of the slide here, such as the fact that we can think about, yeah, the leading actor played Othello likely in blackface. Which just, I'm not saying it's okay back then, but it certainly is worse now in America than it would have been in 1700s England, or apologies, 1600s. So there was one guy who put such passion into Othello's performance that he actually died on stage. In this guy, Edmund Kean, so you can look him up if you're interested. It actually, yeah, it was played privately, Othello. It was probably also at the Globe, but it was performed at court. Here's Ira Aldridge, who's the first American actor or actor of African descent to finally play Othello, and Edwin Booth as Iago. So he's also a pretty famous actor in New York from the 19th century, and you can go and see his apartment in Gramercy if you want to subscribe to this very elite place called The Players, which you probably don't. All right, so thinking about race in the play, According to Geraldine Hang, author of The Invention of Race in the European Middle Ages, race is one of the primary names we have for our repeating tendency to demarcate human beings through selected differences that are identified as absolute and fundamental, so as to distribute power differentially to human groups. So take a screenshot of that. I have to close, but think about how race and power are interacting in this play and also how it relates to religion. And thank you so much for listening through this half hour of lectures.